Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you that practice the Muslim faith, Ramazan Mubarak. I'm happy to be back in Afghanistan for the first time since April. I try to get back here about once every 90 days or so. This trip, I started out by visiting our military leaders that are here in Afghanistan, but importantly as well, I visited our coalition partners in Mazar-e-Sharif, notably the Germans, the Swedes, and then today I met with a group of Polish officers supporting the mission. They are very impressed with what they see as a significant change in the environment, a level of confidence on the part of the Afghan security forces, as well as, importantly, among the people of Afghanistan, and especially since the milestone 2013 announcement in June, where it's now the standard across Afghanistan that the Afghan security forces are in the lead with our support, our coalition support. So an important visit for me to see how that milestone was being received. Also met with Minister of Defense Bishmullah Khan Mohammadi, and I'll have dinner tonight with General Karimi. But as many of you know, I also met with President Karzai today, and I complimented him on the progress made by his security forces. We talked about a variety of things, including, of course, the Bilateral Security Agreement, and my view as a military officer, my view that agreement would reflect our continued commitment to the development of the Afghan security forces beyond 2014. And I think that's an important commitment to make as soon as possible, again, to continue the momentum of the milestone 2013 and this increasing confidence that the security forces feel, but also that the people of Afghanistan feel. And I assured him that that's our motivation for the Bilateral Security Agreement, the motivation to continue the development of his security forces as the best guarantor of future security in Afghanistan. So with that, I thank you for your efforts to report on what I think is among the most historical changes in the world here in Afghanistan, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Could you start with Radio Azadi?
Yeah, this is Asaduddin from Radio Azadi. Official in presidential office, they say United States still does not give the confidence and the confidence about their financial aid and security and stability in Afghanistan beyond 2014. They say if United States does not do this, they will not sign the security agreement. What's your comment on that?
Well, first of all, the conversation was very positive, so I'm not sure if you have a different impression of the conversation, but it was an entirely positive conversation about how to continue to move ahead. Second, it's not just the guarantees of the United States that I think are important for Afghanistan, but this broader coalition that has been trying to accomplish this mission over the last more than 10 years now. In terms of the guarantees, you know, we've made some commitments both in Chicago at the summit, in Tokyo there were some commitments made, and what the Bilateral Security Agreement does is it essentially establishes the framework in which those guarantees can be accomplished. So, you know, one of the things that I have noticed is that sometimes the reporting can focus on what may have been the more contentious part of a conversation. But I can tell you with great candor and integrity that the conversation today with the president of Afghanistan was very positive. And I left there believing that he is committed, as we are, to moving ahead with this bilateral security agreement as soon as possible.
New York Times?
If Azam Ahmed of the New York Times.
Yeah.
If the bilateral security agreement doesn't happen, what happens to the funding that's guaranteed for the ANSF?
Yeah, I know you're asking the wrong guy. You know, the meaning the you know the that's a question that will be should it come to that would be discussed among the policymakers in not just in our capital, but in capitals who have made those commitments, both in Chicago for the security forces and in Tokyo on the economic side. I personally believe that the bilateral security agreement is an important factor, maybe even the critical factor in assuring that those commitments will be delivered, because I think that the continued commitment to building the security forces is what will give those who choose to invest in the future of Afghanistan confidence that their investment will be a good investment, because it is, after all, this intersection of security and economic development. I think that we have to maintain that momentum.
If they don't, if that money dries up, what do you think happens?
Well, I think that we've made so much progress, but it's not yet irreversible. I mean, I think that the confidence of the security forces and the confidence of the Afghan people will continue to grow. And I think any disruption in that growth, that progress, could be a setback for the country, and both economically and in the security arena.
Okay, General, I have two quick questions. First one.
Okay.
How serious is the zero option? Is it an option? Is still on the table? And does it mean Afghanistan is once again on the verge of abandonment? And second one.
No, that's a great question. And by the way, I don't have a zero. Oh, okay. Well, let me answer that one then. Are they related, the two questions?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And also the Interior Minister said today that 2,748 police personnel have been killed in the last 4 months. Isn't it alarming for you, and do you think the Afghan forces will bear the hit long run?
Yeah. Well, first, I don't have a zero option. No one has asked me to prepare a zero option. I don't recommend a zero option. So there is no zero option, but there could be a zero outcome, because we can only stay here if we're invited to do so. And so that's why I'm so personally committed to doing anything I can do to set the conditions for this bilateral security agreement. Because look, I've been committed to the development of the Afghan security forces. I've had a son and a daughter, both serve here, both of whom worked on the side of the mission that is building the Afghan security forces. For me, this is a family issue. So, as a military leader, I will do everything in my power to assure my Afghan counterparts and your political leaders, or the Afghan political leaders, that we are sincerely interested in continuing that relationship and their development as the best guarantor of future security. And, there's other lines of effort. There's reconciliation efforts. There's a lot of other efforts out there, all of which I support. But my job is to build help build the best possible Afghan security forces, so that if those other efforts fail, that Afghanistan has what it needs to guarantee its own security. And that won't happen in the next year, but it can happen if we stay at it beyond 2014. Now, to your point about the casualties that they've suffered, both on the police side, but also on the Army side as well. The police, of course, the concept of security in Afghanistan today is a layered approach. So the local police have the first layer of defense, followed by the Afghan uniformed police, the federal police, and then, of course, the Army is the outer ring, if you will. And so the police naturally are at the point of greatest risk, because they are living and operating and establishing checkpoints and protecting facilities that are attacked. They've done it very bravely. And by the way, even though some checkpoints have been attacked, and in some cases very few of them overrun, the security forces have gone back and retaken them, which is really encouraging. Now, I will tell you, we had a conversation today with Minister Mohammadi and with General Karimi about how we can help them learn how to reduce the level of casualties. And some of it is training, some of it is leadership, some of it is equipment. It's that combination, but they're very alert to it and have asked us for our advice and assistance on how to lower the casualty rate. But I'll tell you, the first thing we ought to make note of is that the Afghan security forces are acting very courageously and have taken over responsibility for the security of the country.
Afghan officials complain, our staff, especially U.S., that they are leaving the bases with many mines and explosives, and it had caused many casualties among the civilians. Any comment?
Yeah, I can tell you that any allegation that we are leaving bases with unexploded ordnance, or for that matter, environmental problems, fuel spills, is false. We have a very deliberate checklist. We coordinate with not only with Afghan leaders at the national level, but also at the local level. There's inspections that go on before we depart, and then we depart. So there is no possibility that we are leaving a base with at any risk to the people of Afghanistan.
CBS?
Mukhtar from CBS. When there is no zero option, how many U.S. troops should stay beyond 2014?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Question, sorry.
No,
Yes,
go ahead.
you spoke with President Karzai today. What exactly he wants from United States for not signing the BSA? Why is he's pushing it back?
On the first question about how big should our presence be after the end of 14, we've got several options, and those are options that are in consideration both inside of my own country, but also with our NATO partners, and also in consultation with our Iraqi partners. And so what it really comes down to is at what level will we provide training and assistance, how many bases, how much support do we need to provide to other agencies of our government that are doing, for example, economic development. And as we answer that question, also we're looking to see how the security forces have performed this year during this fighting season. And I've already told you that that's, I think, on a very positive trend. And then we'll see how the threat changes over time. So we haven't made that decision yet on how many, but we know for what purpose. It's training and assistance, and it's support of not just the security line of effort, but also the economic line of effort. And that decision, I think, should be made soon, but it hasn't been made yet. What was the second part of your question?
You met President Karzai.
Oh, yeah. And you're asking what he's asking of us in order to sign it. He's asking us some very reasonable questions. What's in it for the Afghan people? Why should the Afghan people desire a bilateral security agreement with the United States? And I assured him that the answer to that question is that we have spent the last 10 years trying to help Afghanistan. Secondly, we are very committed to helping prepare and develop a security force that will protect the Afghan people and Afghan sovereignty, and acknowledge and live up to its constitution and a unified Afghanistan. I think that was an important point he wanted to hear from me personally. And so the answer to the question, what's in it for the people of Afghanistan, it's the continued development of their security forces, to include the development of an air force, for example, which we can't accomplish in the next year, but which should be accomplished in order to give Afghanistan what it needs. And our commitment that's our motivation, is to continue to develop the Afghan security forces so that over time they continue to grow and develop and assure Afghan security. And that's, militarily, that's our only motivation.
Wall Street Journal?
General Nathan Hodge of the Wall Street Journal. As you know, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has invited or extended a formal invitation to President Karzai. In your conversations with President Karzai, did you talk about the bilateral relationship? Do you believe that he needs to invest more energetically in a bilateral relationship with Pakistan?
With Pakistan? Well, first of all, he brought it up himself and related to me that he had a good meeting with the foreign minister from Pakistan. He made note of the fact that this is President Karzai now. He made note of the fact that he thinks that Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the United States need to work together more closely on trying to establish a viable peace process. And he said that based on that meeting, he was encouraged that this might be an important moment to advance that idea that the three of us, but with Afghanistan's interest foremost in mind, that process could be renewed in a way that had been set back a bit, as you know, just a month ago.
Lord Channel 1, welcome General back to Afghanistan. I got two questions. First, we had an interview with the Chief of Staff of President Karzai office, and these days after the statement that Afghan people, common people, the public opinions become doubtful about the honesty of international, especially when he called the office, the Doha office, as a plot and conspiracy by the United States to Pakistan to divide Afghanistan. What's your clear comment to such a accusation and allegation? My second question is about the BSA. The President Karzai's chief of staff told to us that this is a long list of wants of United States in this BSA. It is about 26 page, which not influence only Afghanistan but also the region. But we have just three wants and wealth from the United States, which they are not agreeing to give us this grantee. First is the protecting of Afghanistan against Iran and especially against the attacks of the Pakistan. The second is the equipment and supporting of the ANSF in Afghanistan, and third one is the developing of the economy of Afghanistan. Is it correct? And what's your comments to these things? And what is these 26 page of long list of United States that want from Afghanistan?
Well, actually, I haven't seen the latest draft of the Bilateral Security Agreement. It wouldn't surprise me, though, that it was 26 pages long because there's lawyers involved. And I hope I just haven't insulted an entire portion of the room here. But fundamentally, in response to your question about the three requests or the three requirements, if you will, on the Afghan side, I think they can be resolved. Now, look, I've said in other places, this is not about anyone suggesting that the United States has to choose, between Afghanistan or Pakistan. That's a relationship. The relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan has to evolve over time, whether or not the United States happens to be here. I've also said, to repeat what I mentioned to President Karzai, that the profound importance of the Bilateral Security Agreement is that if the question is how will Afghanistan continue to secure itself over time, then the answer over time has to be that it has to develop the capability to do so. Our offer is to be part of helping that occur. In other words, helping Afghanistan develop its security forces so that the question is not whether someone else at some point in the future will help them secure from various threats, but that they'll have their own ability to do so. That's where most nations in the world want to be, that they don't have to rely on anybody to do their work for them. And that's what the Bilateral Security Agreement, I think, begins to bring into focus. And by the way, our presence here has already been a stabilizing influence in some issues that have arisen between Afghanistan and Pakistan. You've had some border issues, as you well know. And we've actually, because of our relationships on the Pakistan side and our relationships on the Afghan side, we've been able to help resolve those issues. We don't resolve them ourselves because you're a sovereign country, they're a sovereign country. But we can facilitate the conversation because we have relationships on both sides of the border. So I think on that basis, I'm somewhat more optimistic than I was before I came over here, that we can work through this and have a bilateral security agreement fairly soon.
But one of the biggest allegations, however, international, especially the U.S., is that you are pro-Pakistan more than to take the Afghan side. And this is why President Karzai and his very inner circle are telling every day that because of this issue, even they suspend the BSA. If it happens like this, it continue, they're telling to the public opinion that they will never sign this agreement.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm having this press conference, actually. It's an opportunity for me to clarify and also to explain. And, if you add up our support, even in terms of, even monetary support, if you add up our support for Afghanistan over the last 10 years and place it side by side with our support for Pakistan, we have supported Afghanistan exponentially more. And by the way, we've lost 3,200 United States men and women killed in action, many, many more wounded, many, many more who have lost limbs to help Afghanistan progress. We haven't lost a single soldier, airman, Marine, or sailor in Pakistan. I don't think it's impossible for us to have both of you as friends, but I assure you that this is not about a conspiracy to advantage Pakistan by us signing the BSA. The BSA is a commitment to Afghanistan, not to Pakistan.
If we can move on around the room, just give everyone a chance to have one question.
The
Right
vision
at
of
the end, we can follow up.
Afghanistan to my first question.
We need to move on to the next
Yeah.
question.
You're out.
Mahmoud from Philip Group. I just want to ask today the Afghan Minister of Interior said in the parliament that the American military about 2 or 3 years ago paid just about $1 million to Taliban just not to attack them when they are carrying their logistics across the highways. I just want to know your comment.
Yeah, if that happened, first of all, it would be illegal in our system for us to use the money that we've been given. And the money that, again, I'm talking about the military side of this because that's the only side I can really speak of with authority. The money that we get for the development of the Afghan security forces by our law has to go to the development of the Afghan security forces. If at any time we find that there's been a violation of that, then we investigate and we hold people accountable. But I've never heard that, and I can assure you that if there were ever any evidence that it occurred, we would investigate it.
Sean Carberry, NPR. You've described a positive conversation with President Karzai today, but since Doha, the atmospherics between the two countries have been dreadful. There's been one issue after another.
Yeah.
There's been this media war going on, and Afghans are increasingly concerned that this is going to fall apart and eventually no deal will be signed. How do you reconcile the difference between what's been playing out, again, with this customs issue that popped up last week? It's, again, one thing after another, and you're saying it sounded like a pleasant conversation today. So where is this? Is Karzai just trying to play this negotiation out in the media to force the U.S. hand, or are there some real toxic issues that still have to be worked on?
Well, look, I mean, I'll concede right from the start that in an environment as complex as we are both dealing with, that is to say, our Afghan partners and us, there's going to be moments when there are missteps and miscommunications and suspicions, and fortunately we've had the opportunity over the last 10 years to work through those. So for example, you used the example of the military technical agreement and some of the guarantees at the border crossings. We've had that conversation. General Dunford has personally with the Afghan senior leaders to inquire why the provisions of that agreement have been violated, and now customs fees that we weren't anticipating paying are now being levied. And I've been convinced by the senior leadership in Kabul that some of this is things that happen locally that they may be unwitting to or unaware of until it's brought to their attention. And I think that particular issue, we're working through it. Are there other issues like that? Yeah, there's plenty of them, and there will continue to be plenty of them. All the more reason, I think, for us to have these frequent engagements at the most senior levels, to make sure that we're all speaking with one voice about what we all seek. And I am convinced that we all seek a future an Afghanistan that is stable, that is unified, that has a constitution that guarantees the freedoms that it guarantees, and that in the case of the United States military in particular, but also the coalition, that we continue to build that relationship with the security forces to make them capable of defending themselves against both internal and external threats.
But does public atmosphere damage, though, the feelings of the Afghan people, even if behind closed doors you are resolved?
Yeah, I mean, look, somebody told me, I'm not sure if this is accurate, but in 2002, I think there was one television channel in Afghanistan, and today there's 50. Would any of you suggest to me, not you, but would anyone suggest to me that all 50 of those stations will probably be reporting the same issues in exactly the same way? Would you even accuse our country of having that consistency of message? Look, it's a democracy now. And in a democracy, freedom of speech will take you in directions that sometimes surprise you. So I think the most important thing is events like this where I can give my personal assurances, as can other senior leaders as they come and visit Afghanistan, that our motivation is the continued development of a stable and secure and democratic Afghanistan. And when things rub uncomfortably between us, we have to work them out.
Kevin T. with the Washington Post. You mentioned the need to advise the Afghan Air Force beyond 2014.
Yeah.
What other enablers would you like to provide to the ANSF beyond 2014? Space air support, medevac support. How do you reconcile those interests with the NATO pledge, which, as far as I understand, doesn't allow for any of that kind of support?
Well, the NATO pledge limits the enablers that are provided by the coalition to the Afghans. Sort of a separate question, meaning, we have to develop their enablers. The question is, will there be a gap that we have to bridge? And we're trying to work through that. But I think importantly, as I talked to General Dunford about his campaign plan, we've gone from, let's call it force generating Kandaks, for example. And now we're very much, especially since Milestone 2013, we're now in the business of force sustainment. So it's kind of the architectures of the security force that are now the focus. Combined arms integration, leadership, training, and especially sustainment, that I think you'll see us place increasing emphasis on. And then that gets to what other enablers? Well, clearly the development of a military medical system and casualty evacuation, close air support, the integration of indirect and direct fire, planning, the fusion of intelligence and operations, all the things that make a kind of a military that's just getting started, that actually takes them to the next level. By the way, another reason that I think this bilateral security agreement is so important is to take them to that next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got about 5 to 7 more minutes, so if we can just kind of keep the questions moving, we may not be able to hit everybody.
Well, I'm not going to hit anybody, but I may not be able to take all your questions.
I'm Tia Bowie with NBC News. I was hoping that you could touch a little more on what you spoke to President Karzai about when it comes to the talks in Doha, and also kind of hitting back on the zero option that our colleagues asked about. You mentioned that there's not going to be a zero option, but this also depends on what the public in America thinks, what the Congress thinks. Do you think it's possible to convince a growingly anti-war Congress and public to send troops, continue to send troops here beyond 2014?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, as to the conversations with President Karzai, we didn't talk about the Doha office announcement in particular, but we did, to go back to the earlier question from this gentleman, we did talk about some of the things that have happened in the recent past that created some suspicion about our motivations, and it was a very lively, generally positive, in fact, from my perspective, entirely positive conversation that gave me the opportunity to speak, at least from the military perspective, about our motivations, both today and beyond 2014. To your point about the United States of America, I mean, that's partly my responsibility, by the way, is to articulate why Afghanistan matters, not just today after 10 years, but why it should matter to us in the period of time after 2014, because we are under, there is a bit of fatigue. There is a bit of economic pressure that's clearly being brought to bear. But, we made a commitment to Afghanistan to put it in a position to where it would not be subject to becoming a safe haven for extremists, to where a security force, an Afghan security force, could guarantee its progress toward its own particular form of democracy and the individual freedoms and rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution. And having made a commitment, it's my personal recommendation that we should live up to it. Secondly, there are continued interests in this region for the United States. The relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan is of importance to the United States. Stability in the South Asian region is of importance to us, and including up into Central Asia. I mean, there's counter-narcotics interests, there's economic interests. So I think the stability of the region is of importance and in the interests of the United States to do as much as we can to contribute to it. And it happens that our relationship with Afghanistan is a perfect place to make that commitment, and that's what we're seeking to do in the Bilateral Support Agreement.
General Mohammed Leela with ABC News. Based on what you're seeing in your evaluation of the ANSF, can you foresee any scenarios where American troops could be coming home early?
Well, as you know, we've already taken a decision to reduce the size of the force to 34,000 by February. And we think, and in my conversations with my Afghan counterparts, they think that the Bilateral Support Agreement is important to establish this air of confidence on all sides that we really mean what we say. The next most important issue will be the elections in April of 2014. And we're in conversation, 2014 April. We're in conversation with our Afghan counterparts about what kind of support they think they'll need in order to enable and secure those elections. Now, frankly, I think from a security perspective, I think they're capable of securing the elections today. I mean, they did it, 3 years ago, and they're much better today than they were then, and the Taliban is much less effective than they were. So I have actually quite a high degree of confidence that they can secure the elections. But we can certainly provide some assistance in moving ballots around and moving observers around and contributing, intelligence, to ensure that the threat doesn't interfere with that the enemies of Afghanistan don't interfere with the elections. So we do have something to contribute, and we're trying to determine what Afghanistan may want us to help with before we decide on how quickly or slowly we'll off-ramp beyond 34,000.
General Rob Taylor from Reuters. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things. You've mentioned that you're positive about the bilateral security agreement proceeding, but I just wonder whether there's any time frame in your mind. There's a lot of coalition countries that are waiting to see what happens with the US before they decide what they're going to do. It's obviously getting fairly crucial with the elections approaching and next year being transition. I'm just wondering whether you have a sort of
Yeah, I do actually, and it's for exactly the reason you suggest. I mentioned that I visited with my German, my Swedish, my Polish counterparts. I'm a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, CHODS, and there are some timelines that could become a limiting factor for them in their planning and resourcing and training cycles. And so you ask me if I have a particular time frame in mind. Militarily, I would like to understand the future more clearly through the Bilateral Security Agreement sometime between now and October. Why do I say October? October, we would like to have let's call it the enduring framework in place by October of 14, so that there would be approximately 90 days before the current mandate ends and a new mandate in NATO parlance called resolute support would begin. So October of 13 is about a year prior to that, and militarily, that my advice would be that we should try to achieve as much clarity and certainty as possible about a year out from when we'd want to be set in that configuration. And that would lead me to suggest that October, not later than October, would be the right time frame.
Last question.
I'm going to defer my question to Rob asked my question,
okay.
So I'll defer to John
from
the BBC.
John Brain, BBC. You've spoken of the increased confidence of Afghan people in their own security forces, but the country's politicians don't really agree with you on that, do they? Because on the very day of your visit, they voted to sack their interior minister for not being able to secure the country the same way they actually sacked his predecessor. So isn't there really a mismatch between what you're saying about the Afghans' view of security and the actual reality on the ground?
Well, there may be a mismatch in expectations. I can't speak for that because I haven't had that conversation. I will say, the Taliban began this year with certain stated objectives, and they were very clear about what they hoped to accomplish. They wanted to regain some territory that they had lost. They wanted to interfere with our freedom of movement. They wanted to break the confidence of the Afghan security forces. They didn't accomplish any of that, and the fourth objective was to, from time to time, conduct a sensational attack, in particular in some large urban area. They have done that. The challenge is in reconciling the ability of the Afghan security forces to prevent the first three, but stop that fourth one from occurring. And it's that kind of episodic, high-profile attack that gathers so much attention that does, in fact, undermine the confidence of the Afghan people. What I will say is we probably, and I say we meaning the two of us, the Afghan side and the coalition side, we probably don't do as good a job as we should in articulating the many things that we prevent. The weapons caches with large amounts of homemade explosive that are captured, the number of weapons experts and potential suicide bombers that are captured or killed. So I guess what I'm predicting for you is, until there is some lasting peace process, whenever that would occur, there will probably be, from time to time, a sensational attack, because they're almost impossible to stop entirely. You can lower the frequency, you can impose a greater cost on the enemies of Afghanistan. But from time to time, especially someone who's willing to commit suicide will probably succeed in doing that. But I think we can lower the number of them. I think we can attack the network more effectively, the network that supports suicide attackers. And by the way, the Afghan Special Operating Forces have been particularly successful in their development, and that's the key, because it's that fusion of intelligence and operation and special operators who can find, fix, and finish these potential attackers that actually will prevent those suicide bombers from achieving their goal. But 3 out of 4 of the objectives on our side have been achieved.
Sir, with your permission, I think we can maybe wrap up before I look forward.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, General.
You're not a Red Sox fan, right? This could hang in the balance whether I terminate this press conference.
I'm afraid so. When they won last night,
I know.
extra innings. What's the
Boston's strong, by the way. You want to see how a city can rally around, have its citizens rally around itself. That's a great example.
It's a tough spring, but inspiring one too. What's the biggest challenge that General Dempsey faces?
Probably having me as his military advisor in Washington. First of all, I think he's doing an absolutely tremendous job. because he is, he's at that point of intersection between kind of the tactical military issues, back to your point, how to reduce the level of violence, how to literally increase the capability of the Afghan security forces. He's at the intersection of that and strategy. Strategy being, how do we reconcile what we're trying to achieve with the resources available and the means to do so. So he's constantly adjusting how he's operating in order to achieve those ends. And he's also at the intersection of that strategy as it relates regionally. So he has the opportunity on occasion to, back to the point about the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan and our ability to assist it, he can bring together military leaders on both sides of the border, and he can travel when there are contentious issues. He can be a very important part of solving them. And then he's also responsible more than anyone else for explaining how we're doing over here, and more importantly, how Afghanistan is doing. So when you think of those three tasks, the first one being you got to win the fight, the second one being you've got to continually adapt your campaign plan to resources and threats and how the security forces of Afghanistan are developing. And then he's got to be our lead spokesman to explain what we're doing and how we're doing it so that, to your point, the American people can gain confidence that the campaign is on track. That's a pretty tough lift, all three of those. I'm guessing he doesn't get much sleep. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to ask the baby question.
I thought you were going to ask a baby question.
That's what I think.